The sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook's dusty Main Street as Vivian Hastings waited beside her market stall, her slender fingers nervously adjusting the red gingham cloth covering her basket of freshly baked goods. It was 1876, 3 years since she'd buried her husband, and the weight of loneliness pressed upon her shoulders as heavily as the summer heat. At 32, Vivian had resigned herself to the quiet life of a widow in this Colorado frontier town. Her dark hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet, a few stubborn strands escaping to frame her face. The other vendors had already packed up for the day, their wagons disappearing down the road as the market hours came to an end. Only Vivian remained, hoping desperately for a last-minute customer. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her attention from her unsold wares. A tall man atop a chestnut mare slowed as he neared the nearly abandoned market square. Dust coated his worn leather boots and the hem of his long coat. His face was partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but she could see he was studying her with curious blue eyes. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Looks like I'm late for the market." "Indeed you are, sir," Vivian replied, trying not to sound disappointed. "Everyone else has gone home for the day. Then it's my good fortune to find you still here." He approached her stall and Vivian got a better look at him. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw, but his smile was kind. He couldn't have been more than 35. "I'm Preston Tucker, just arrived in town yesterday." "Vivian Hastings," she offered, surprised at how readily her name came to her lips. She rarely introduced herself these days, as everyone in Willowbrook knew her as the widow Hastings. Preston glanced at her basket. "What have you got there, Mrs. Hastings?" "Just some bread and apple pies. Nothing special, I'm afraid. I was about to take them home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. "How much for the whole basket?" Vivian blinked in surprise. "The whole basket, sir, that's too much food for one man." "I've got a healthy appetite," he said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And I haven't had home-baked anything since I left Kansas City." She named a price, expecting him to haggle as most men did, but he counted out the exact amount without hesitation and handed it to her. His fingers brushed against her palm, and she felt a small jolt at the contact. It had been so long since she'd touched a man's hand. "Would you allow me to carry this back to your home, Mrs. Hastings?" Preston asked, lifting the heavy basket with ease. "It's getting late, and a lady shouldn't walk alone at dusk." Vivian hesitated. Such an offer from a stranger would normally be refused outright, but there was something about his direct gaze that put her at ease. "That's very kind, Mr. Tucker, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition at all. Truth be told, I could use some conversation." "Been on the trail too long with just my horse for company." Against her better judgment, Vivian nodded. "My home is just past the church, the small white house with blue shutters." They walked side by side through town, Preston leading his horse by the reins with one hand and carrying her basket with the other. The townspeople they passed gave them curious looks. Vivian was well aware that she'd become something of a recluse since Edward's death. "What brings you to Willowbrook, Mr. Tucker?" she asked, eager to divert attention from the whispers around them. "I've come to take over the livery stable. Old Jim Turner wrote to me about buying him out. He's heading to California to live with his daughter." "Oh. You're the man Mr. Turner's been waiting for. He's been talking about retiring for years." "That's me. Spent most of my life raising and training horses on my pa's ranch in Texas. Time to put down some roots of my own." When they reached her modest house, Vivian found herself reluctant to end their conversation. It had been so long since she'd talked to someone new, someone who didn't look at her with pity in their eyes. "Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Tucker? It's the least I can offer for your help." He smiled, and Vivian felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the evening heat. "I'd be much obliged, Mrs. Hastings." Inside her neat kitchen, Vivian moved about with practiced efficiency, setting water to boil on the stove while Preston sat at the small oak table. She cut a slice of apple pie and placed it before him. "Your reward for carrying my basket," she explained. Preston took a bite and closed his eyes in appreciation. "This is the best pie I've tasted since my mother's," he said with genuine pleasure. "You've got a gift, Mrs. Hastings." Vivian felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "It was my grandmother's recipe. She taught you well." They talked easily as they shared coffee and pie. Preston told her about his years driving cattle and working with horses, while Vivian spoke of her life in Willowbrook. She found herself sharing stories of Edward and their brief 5 years of marriage before pneumonia took him, something she rarely discussed with anyone. "He sounds like he was a good man," Preston said quietly. "He was," Vivian agreed, surprised to find that speaking of Edward brought more warmth than pain. "But it's been 3 years now. Life goes on, as they say." The mantel clock chimed 8 and Preston stood reluctantly. "I should be going. I've taken enough of your time, Mrs. Hastings." At the door, he paused. "Would you consider bringing some of your baking to the livery? I'll be working on fixing it up, and a man needs sustenance for such labor." Vivian smiled, feeling something long dormant stirring within her. "I think that could be arranged, Mr. Tucker." "Preston," he corrected with a gentle smile. "Call me Preston, then you must call me Vivian." As she watched him mount his horse and ride away, Vivian realized that for the first time in years she was looking forward to tomorrow. True to her word, Vivian appeared at the livery stable the next morning with a basket of fresh biscuits and a pot of coffee. She found Preston already hard at work, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms as he replaced a broken stall door. "You're an angel of mercy," he declared when he saw what she'd brought. They sat on a bench outside the stable, enjoying the simple breakfast as the town came to life around them. This became their routine over the following weeks. Vivian would bring food, sometimes breakfast, sometimes lunch, and they would talk while Preston took a brief rest from his labors. She learned that he had fought for the Union in the war, that he had a younger sister in St. Louis, and that he could whistle any tune after hearing it just once. Preston proved to be a skilled horseman and an even better businessman. Word spread quickly about the new owner of the livery, and farmers and travelers alike sought his services. Vivian found herself baking more than ever to keep up with the orders that came through Preston, as his customers developed a taste for her pies and bread. One evening in late August, Preston arrived at Vivian's door just as she was finishing her supper. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, hat in hand. "Not at all. Is everything all right?" "More than all right. I've just received the last of the new equipment I ordered from Denver. The livery is officially ready for business, and I couldn't have done it without your support these past weeks." He shifted slightly, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "I was wondering if you might accompany me to the harvest dance next Saturday, as a thank you, of course." Vivian's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't attended any social functions since Edward's death, preferring to avoid the pitying glances and well-meaning but painful inquiries about her welfare. "I'm not much for dancing these days," she said hesitantly. "Neither am I," Preston admitted with a rueful smile. "But I'd like to try with you." The sincerity in his voice broke through her defenses. "I'd be honored, Preston." The night of the dance arrived clear and cool, the first hint of autumn in the air. Vivian found herself standing before her mirror, smoothing the skirt of her best dress, a deep blue that she hadn't worn since before Edward's illness. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned a small brooch at her throat, a simple silver piece that had been her mother's. Preston arrived precisely at 7, looking transformed in a clean white shirt and dark vest. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, and Vivian felt a flutter in her stomach at the sight of him. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice low and reverent. The town hall was decorated with paper lanterns and autumn flowers, the local band playing a lively reel as couples spun around the wooden floor. When Vivian and Preston entered together, A momentary hush fell over the crowd before conversation resumed, now interspersed with curious whispers. "Everyone's looking at us," Vivian murmured, suddenly self-conscious. "Let them look," Preston replied, offering his arm. "They're just surprised to see the two most hardworking people in town actually taking a night off." His easy confidence bolstered her, and soon they were dancing, Preston leading her through a waltz with surprising grace for a man who claimed to be out of practice. As they moved around the floor, Vivian gradually relaxed, remembering the joy of moving to music, of being held by strong arms. Later, as they took a break near the refreshment table, Martha Wilson, the banker's wife and Willowbrook's most notorious gossip, approached them. "Vivian Hastings, as I live and breathe, we haven't seen you at a social gathering in ages." Her sharp eyes darted between Vivian and Preston. "And Mr. Tucker, isn't it? How lovely that you've convinced our widow to rejoin society." The emphasis she placed on widow made Vivian stiffen. Before she could respond, Preston stepped slightly closer to her side. "Mrs. Hastings has been kind enough to keep me company this evening," he said smoothly. "And I consider myself fortunate indeed." Martha's eyebrows rose, but Preston had already turned to Vivian. "Would you care for some air? It's rather warm in here." Outside, the night air was crisp and sweet with the scent of fallen leaves. They walked in comfortable silence along the path that circled the town hall, the music from inside creating a distant soundtrack. "I apologize for Mrs. Wilson," Vivian said at last. "She means well, I suppose, but you have nothing to apologize for," Preston interrupted gently. "People will talk. It's what they do in small towns." "And what are they saying about us, do you think?" Preston stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the silvery moonlight. "They're saying that Preston Tucker is courting Vivian Hastings if she'll have him." Vivian's breath caught in her throat. "Is that what you're doing, courting me?" "I've been trying to, though perhaps not very well." He took her hand in his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "Vivian, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never met anyone like you. You're strong and kind," and he paused, searching for words. "When I'm with you, I feel like I've found the home I've been looking for all my life." Tears pricked at the corners of Vivian's eyes. "I never expected to feel this way again," she whispered. "After Edward died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now I find myself looking forward to each new day, to seeing you." She smiled up at him. "Yes, Preston Tucker, I believe I would like to be courted by you." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Vivian rose up to meet him, their lips touching in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as years of loneliness melted away. When they returned to the dance, Vivian no longer cared about the stares and whispers. She danced every dance with Preston, laughing more than she had in years. The following months brought a deepening of their relationship. Preston proved to be a considerate suitor, never rushing Vivian or making her feel pressured. They took long rides into the countryside on Sundays after church, picnicked by the river, and spent quiet evenings on Vivian's porch, talking of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Winter arrived early that year, bringing heavy snows that blanketed Willowbrook in white. The harsh weather kept many indoors, but it didn't stop Preston from trudging through snowdrifts each evening to spend time with Vivian on Christmas Eve. He arrived carrying a small pine tree, which they decorated together with paper stars and candles. They sat before the fire, drinking hot cider and sharing stories of Christmases past. "This is the happiest I've been in a long time," Vivian confessed, leaning against his shoulder. "Me too," Preston agreed, reaching into his pocket. "I have something for you." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a heart-shaped locket. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as Vivian opened it to find a tiny pressed wildflower inside. "I picked that flower the first day I met you after I left your house. I thought it was as pretty as your smile." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes as she closed the locket. "Help me put it on," As Preston fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin, Vivian made a decision. She turned to face him, gathering her courage. "I love you, Preston." His face lit up with joy. "I love you too, Vivian, more than I can say." Their kiss was tender and full of promise, sealing the words they had both longed to speak. Spring brought renewal to the land and to Vivian's heart. She had expanded her baking business, supplying not only Preston's customers but also the newly opened hotel with bread and pastries. The townspeople had gradually accepted their relationship, many remarking that it was high time the widow Hastings found happiness again. One April evening, Preston invited Vivian for a ride to his favorite spot overlooking the valley. The wildflowers were beginning to bloom, painting the hillsides with splashes of color. They spread a blanket on the ground and shared the picnic Vivian had prepared. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the landscape, Preston took Vivian's hand. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, suddenly serious. "About what I want for my life." Vivian felt a flicker of uncertainty. "And what is that, he said simply. "A life with you if you'll have me." From his pocket, he produced a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the fading sunlight. "Vivian Hastings, will you marry me?" Joy burst like wildfire through Vivian's chest. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they sealed their engagement with a kiss that promised forever. They were married in June, beneath an arbor of roses in the church garden. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, even Martha Wilson dabbing at her eyes as the couple exchanged vows. Vivian wore a gown of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, her dark hair adorned with a crown of fresh flowers. Preston couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on the arm of Reverend Thompson, her face radiant with happiness. "You are the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," he whispered as she reached him. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under the stars. As Preston whirled Vivian around the dance floor, she marveled at how much her life had changed in less than a year. "Happy?" Preston asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, resting her head against his chest as they swayed to the music. Their first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. They built a new home on the edge of town, a comfortable house with a large kitchen for Vivian's baking and a view of the mountains Preston loved. The livery stable prospered under Preston's management, and he hired 2 young men to help with the increasing workload. In the winter, a severe blizzard struck Willowbrook, leaving many families stranded and in need. Preston and Vivian opened their home to those whose roofs had collapsed under the weight of snow, feeding and sheltering them until repairs could be made. Working side by side to help their neighbors strengthen their bond even further, spring brought exciting news: Vivian was expecting a child. Preston's reaction upon learning he was to be a father was everything she could have hoped for. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure joy before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned for her condition. "Are you all right? Should you be resting? What do you need?" His questions tumbled out in a rush of loving worry. "I need you to calm down," Vivian laughed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We have months yet before this little one arrives." As her pregnancy progressed, Vivian cut back on her baking work, focusing on preparing for the baby's arrival. Preston proved to be an attentive husband, insisting on handling the heavy chores and bringing Vivian wild strawberries from the hills when she mentioned a craving for them. On a warm September evening, after a long labor that had Preston pacing anxiously outside their bedroom door, Vivian gave birth to a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. "She's perfect," Preston whispered, cradling his daughter with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Just like her mother." They named her Eliza Rose after both their mothers, and she quickly became the center of their world. Preston fashioned a cradle from cherry wood, carving delicate roses along the sides, while Vivian sewed soft blankets and tiny gowns for their daughter. Life settled into a new rhythm, days filled with the livery business, Vivian's smaller baking orders, and the joys and demands of raising Eliza. Nights were for family time, quiet conversations by the fire, and the deep, abiding love that grew stronger with each passing month. As Eliza's first birthday approached, tragedy struck Willowbrook. A fire broke out in the dry goods store, quickly spreading to neighboring buildings. Preston was among the first to respond, joining the bucket brigade that fought desperately to contain the flames. Vivian watched from a safe distance, holding Eliza tightly as the fire raged. When part of the mercantile's roof collapsed, she heard screams that a child was trapped inside. Before anyone could stop him, Preston ran toward the burning building, disappearing into the smoke and flames. The minutes that followed were the longest of Vivian's life. She prayed fervently, clutching Eliza to her chest, her eyes never leaving the mercantile's entrance. Just when hope seemed lost, a figure emerged from the smoke, hunched over and carrying something in his arms. It was Preston, his clothes singed and face blackened with soot, cradling 8-year-old Timothy Jenkins against his chest. The boy was conscious and crying for his mother, but alive thanks to Preston's bravery. Dr. Miller treated Preston for burns on his hands and arms and smoke inhalation that left him coughing for days afterward. Vivian nursed him diligently, applying salve to his wounds and brewing herbal teas to ease his breathing. "You could have been killed," she said one night as she changed his bandages, her voice trembling with the fear she'd been holding at bay. "I couldn't leave that boy to die," Preston replied simply. "All I could think was, what if it were Eliza?" Vivian kissed his forehead, understanding despite her fear. "You're a hero, Preston Tucker, but please don't scare me like that again." As Preston recovered, the town rallied to rebuild the damaged structures. The Jenkins family, overwhelmed with gratitude, insisted on helping with the livery business while Preston healed. Other neighbors brought food and offered assistance with little Eliza, demonstrating the tight-knit community that had embraced the Tuckers as their own. By Christmas, Preston's hands had healed enough for him to resume most of his work. The holiday was a joyous one, with Eliza now walking and babbling, delighted by the colorful paper ornaments and candles on their tree. "I have a surprise for you," Preston told Vivian on Christmas morning, after they had opened their modest gifts. He led her outside where a new buggy stood, painted a cheerful red with her name stenciled on the side in gold letters. "For your baking business," he explained. "I thought you might like to expand again, now that Eliza is getting bigger. You could deliver to the outlying farms." Vivian was speechless, running her hand along the smooth wooden side of the vehicle. "It's beautiful, Preston, but how did you manage it with your hands injured?" "I had help," he admitted with a smile. "Half the men in town owed me favors. And they all love your baking almost as much as they love you." The buggy proved to be exactly what Vivian's business needed. With Preston's encouragement, she established regular deliveries to the scattered farms and ranches around Willowbrook. Her reputation for the finest baked goods in the county spread, and soon she was teaching young women from town her techniques, taking on apprentices to keep up with demand. The years passed in a blend of ordinary days and special moments. Eliza grew into a spirited child with her mother's talent for baking and her father's affinity for horses. When she was 4, the family welcomed a son, James Edward Tucker, a sturdy boy with a serious expression and gentle hands. Through it all, Preston and Vivian's love deepened and matured, weathering the storms of life with grace and resilience. They marked their 10th anniversary with a week-long trip to Denver, leaving the children in the care of trusted friends. It was their first real vacation, and they savored every moment, attending the theater, dining in fine restaurants, and simply enjoying each other's company away from the demands of daily life. "Do you ever regret it?" Preston asked one evening as they strolled arm in arm through a city park, the lights of Denver twinkling around them. "Regret what?" Vivian asked, puzzled. saying yes to a dusty cowboy who bought your basket all those years ago. Vivian stopped walking and turned to face him, taking in the face she knew better than her own, the laugh lines now etched more deeply around his eyes, the silver beginning to thread through his beard, the same warm gaze that had first caught her attention in the market square. "Not for a single moment," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "You didn't just buy my basket, Preston Tucker. You gave me back my future when I thought it was gone forever." He gathered her close, their hearts beating in the same rhythm they had found that night at the harvest dance so long ago. "And you, Vivian Tucker, gave me a home, a family, and more love than I ever dreamed possible." As they stood together under the stars, Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a chance meeting at a nearly deserted market to building a life together brick by brick, day by day. They had known joy and sorrow, triumph and hardship, but through it all, the love that had begun with a simple act of kindness had only grown stronger. In the years that followed, Willowbrook prospered and expanded, as did the Tucker family businesses. Vivian's bakery became an institution, eventually occupying a proper storefront on Main Street run primarily by her apprentices, allowing her to focus on special orders and developing new recipes. Preston's livery evolved into a successful horse breeding operation, with his stock sought after throughout the territory. Eliza grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's determination and her father's adventurous spirit. At 18, she surprised everyone by announcing her intention to attend the new women's college in Denver to study business, with plans to eventually take over management of the bakery. James, quieter but no less ambitious, showed an aptitude for working with horses that made Preston beam with pride. On warm summer evenings, Preston and Vivian would often sit on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Their hands would find each other's, fingers intertwining in the comfortable way of those who have loved deeply and well for many years. "Do you remember that day at the market?" Preston would sometimes ask, a smile in his voice. "How could I forget?" Vivian would reply, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It was the day my life began again." And as twilight settled over Willowbrook, casting long shadows much like those on the evening they first met, they would share a kiss as sweet and promising as their first, grateful for the basket, the time, and the love that had changed everything.